Hello everyone, welcome to Mean Life Studies. In this video, we are going to solve one more SQL problem as part of data analyst or data engineer interview preparation. You can see there is a question number 17, written the eligibility of transactions done by each user. We have given a transactions table that you can see here. This is the transactions table, and we have already solved the number of transactions done by each user and the credit and debit percentage of transactions done by each user in our previous problem, right? Now in this problem we need to find the eligibility of each transactions done by each user. Okay, now if you see, we have user ID, transaction date, transaction ID, amount and type. In order to find out the eligibility of each transaction, it is all depends upon the credit or debit amount, right? If the transaction type is credit, by default it is eligible. If the transaction type is debit, then we need to check the account balance, right? If the account balance is less than this debit amount, then that transaction is not eligible, right? So I'm just assuming the account balances of each user at initial is 0, and also I'm assuming one more thing: the banks are going to give borrowing some amount. Okay, now even though if you are debiting amount, even though there is no amount, then it will be giving, but it is a not eligible amount, so that banks are gaining some interest from this amount. Okay, whenever the users are going to pay back. Okay, now if you see this table, this is the table. Now we'll we need to find the account balance to check this transaction is eligible or not. Okay, for that I need to use window functions, right? In order to find out the account balance, you need to check for each user up to date what is the account balance. Okay, so we will be using running sum or cumulative sum of each user, so that you will be finding the account balance. How can we check it? It's all depends upon the transaction type. If the transaction type is credit, then we will return amount, and we need to add it up of all users. I mean, for each user we need to add up of this amount. If the transaction type is debit, then we need to subtract it, right? So I'm going to use conditional statements, because of we need to apply these conditions, right? That is transaction type. Now we will see, I'm going to return all these columns, select star from, I'm referring this table as T, I mean transaction table as T dot star, comma, I need to find the account balance in the sense, if the amount is credited, then it will be added up. If the amount is debited, then it is subtracted, right? So I will be adding up of case when type equal to credit, then I'm going to return amount, else it is minus amount. Okay, anyway subtraction means adding up of minus value only. Okay, now I'm going to end this. See, this means whenever a transaction type is credit, I'm going to add it up. Whenever the transaction type is debit, then I'm going to subtract it, so that I'm going to sum up all values for each user. Okay, for each user means I need to use partition by, right? Partition by each user, that is partition by user ID, and I'm going to find up to date what is the account balances for those particular user ID. So I have to use order by transaction date. I'm referring this as account balance from transactions T. Okay, now if I execute this one, you can see the account balances for each user ID. See, whenever user ID 1 comes then he did credited. His transaction type is credit of 1000 rupees. Then the account balance is 1000 rupees. Now after the transaction, it is 1000. Okay, before it is 0. Now again, if you see the second, here also it is credit. So credit of 2000. Now account balance is 3000. Now 4000 credit, that is 7000. Now 2500 debit, then what is the account balance now? 4500. Likewise, if you see here 500 debit, see this user ID comes in directly debiting 500 rupees, but there is no balance, that is zero balance. So that will be written here as minus 500. Current balance is minus 500. Now you need to return this status as not eligible, because of we cannot debit amount if the account balance is less than this particular amount, right? then again 2 comes in, again credited amount, that is 7,000. Now again comes in 3,000 debit. So if you see here, credit of 7,500, already 500 is debited. So I'm just filling the amount of 500, and then only remaining balance is 7,000 only. Now again credit of, sorry, debit of 3,000, that will be the differences, right? That is only 4,000 as remain. Likewise, you can see here. Now we need to return the status of each transaction. I already told you, if the transaction is credit, by default it is eligible transaction. If the transaction is debit, then we need to check the account balance. If the account balance after the transaction, I mean after debit, if the account balance is less than or equal to, sorry, if less than 0, then that particular transaction is not eligible. Even though if it is equal to 0, then that is okay, right? But banks are not accepting less than or equal, less than 0. I mean in negative. In negative in the sense banks are giving some borrowing amount, right? But that is not eligible amount only. Okay. Now we'll see that as well. Now I'm going to assign this as city. Okay. Now I'm retrieving all data from CTE, comma, and also I need to return the eligibility column, right? I need to use here conditional statement case when type equal to credit, then that is eligible, right? This is a string, so I need to use inverted commas. Okay. When type equal to debit, then, and also you need to check and account balance is less than 0, then you need to return not eligible. Okay. Else it is eligible. Okay. You will end this as eligibility from CTC. Okay. What you are doing? You are doing, if the transaction type is credit, then by default it is eligible. If the transaction type is debit, then we need to check the account balance is less than 0 or not. If that is less than 0, then that is not eligible. Otherwise, it is eligible only. Okay. I mean, if the transaction type is debit and the account balance is greater than or equal to 0, then the transaction is eligible. Okay. Now if I execute this one, you are getting error. It's that error. Now if I execute this one, you can see here we've got eligibility column. You can see wherever a credit transaction type, by default it is eligible. Okay. But as and when if debit is happened, then you need to check the account balance. If the account balance is less than 0, then that transaction type is not, the transaction is not eligible. Even though it is debit of 500 without having any balance, then it will be we can able to withdraw, but it is not eligible amount. Okay. Now you can see likewise, wherever you see a debit amount, there will be checking with the account balance, right? This is the account balance after debiting of 2,000. Okay, this is eligible amount. Now if you see here, this is a credit amount, but your account balance is minus 1,500. But even though your account balance is negative, the transaction is eligible because of this is a credit, right? So you borrowed some amount before and you are crediting it, so it is eligible. Okay. Likewise, it is debit of 1,500. See, this is user ID 4, and the user ID 4 is already debited 2,000, and the account balance is 1,000 rupees. Now you are going to debit of 1,500, but you have only 1,000 rupees. So minus 500 will be the borrowing amount. So that transaction is not eligible. Even though you are able to withdraw money, but that is not eligible amount. Okay. Now, likewise, you can see all values. Okay. I hope you understand. If the transaction type is credit, by default, it's eligible amount. If the transaction type is debit, then you need to check the account balance. If the account balance is less than the debit amount, then the transaction is not eligible. If the account balance is greater than 0, greater than or equal to 0, then the transaction is eligible even if it is debit. Okay, I hope you understand this one, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and share. Thank you.